Before I get started on this episode, I just wanted to let you guys know that content over on the Golden State with Mates Patreon is now available to absolutely everyone through the first 2 weeks of January. So if you enjoy tuning into my podcast episodes or want to get the latest Warriors news and information through my daily Warriors newsletter, then go check it out. That'd be fantastic. I'll leave a link in the description. Coming up on this episode, the Draymond Green, Anthony Davis trade discussion hits a boiling point after Golden State's victory over the Utah Jazz at Chase Center on Saturday night. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you've all had a good new year and welcome to 2026. Hasn't been great for me. You might still be able to hear from my voice that I'm struggling a little bit. I've still got COVID. It's knocked me around for the last 4 or 5 days or so. I think I'm coming out the other end of it, and that's why I wanted to jump back in and record a podcast today, but I'm still very heavily congested in the chest and the nasal region and stuff like that. So this might be a little bit of a battle to get through, but I certainly have got some things that I need to get off my chest from what's happened in regard to Warrior basketball over the past 4 or 5 days, both on and off the court. In that time, obviously, the Warriors have recorded wins over the Hornets. They lost, obviously, on Friday, blowout loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder without Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and DeAnthony Melton, it must be said. And then they responded yesterday against the Utah Jazz with a victory there, which certainly brought a big talking point in terms of Draymond Green, who was ejected, obviously, but the Warriors were kind of inspired by that and outscored the Jazz 75-54 from that point on to record a 123-114 victory. So the Warriors are now 6-2 in their last 8 games, which is good on paper and what this team needs to do. I think they're now 19-17 on the season. It's also kind of what I expected based on the schedule that they've had. I spoke, I think, just before Christmas on just how easy the Warriors schedule was kind of looking for the next 21 games, and I expected them to kind of go like 14-7 or 15-6 in these next 21 games. They've obviously got through that little 3-game road trip where they obviously faced the Raptors, the Nets, and the Hornets. They've returned home. They do face the Clippers in LA tomorrow, but I think that's the only one of this like 10 of 11 game stretch where their games are all at Chase Center. And then if you look at the teams they've played over these past 8 games, the Suns, the Magic, the Mavs, the Raptors, the Nets, the Hornets, the Thunder, and the Jazz. Again, aside from the Thunder, like all teams that you would conceivably think the Warriors should beat. Now, obviously, that always hasn't been the case so far this season. The Warriors have lost so many games against opposition that they should have beaten or that they were in position to beat. And, that was never more so than that game against Toronto going back to last weekend. But 6-2 in this 8-game stretch is good, right? It's kind of what I expected, but at this point, just leveling up the expectation is not the worst thing for the Warriors right now. So it still leaves me in a point and still leaves the Warriors in a point where I think they need to make a major move. This team is, not necessarily a championship contender, obviously, as presently constructed. And despite Steve Kerr's comments in regard to, not being the same kind of top-tier annual contender from 5-6 years ago and trying to match up with the San Antonio Spurs and Oklahoma City Thunder, which, again, as presently constructed, we can be critical of his comments from the last few days in terms of that and think to yourself, hang on, why is the head coach being so dismissive of his own team's chances? But he's also, you've got to be real about this stuff, and I think he was just being brutally honest in those comments. And again, as much as we don't like to hear, that's kind of the truth of the matter, and that means that if the Warriors do want to spring back into being a larger threat than what they are currently, then obviously a big move is going to need to be made. And, Mike Dunleavy Jr. saying that, that the improvement can come from within and stuff like that. That's just posturing to me before the mid-season trade deadline. That is obviously what any general manager should be saying, because once you go out and publicly state that, oh yeah, we're looking to make a big move, well, that just puts pressure on you because the fan base now expects you to go out and make a big move. And 2, obviously, that kind of lessens your leverage in trade discussions with other teams because suddenly they know that, hey, you want to make a big move, so therefore you're probably going to be willing to pay a bit of a higher price for that. So the Warriors need to go out and make a big move. And I think what going through social media after the game yesterday was probably the first point where the whole Draymond Green, Anthony Davis discussion became really, really prominent. Like it was, a regular thing that I was seeing from Warrior fans on my timeline, and I tweeted a little bit about it. It was a strong night. It was a strong night for the I would trade Draymond Green for Anthony Davis crowd, right? Whether you're in that or not, let me know in the comments below if you're on YouTube. But Anthony Davis had, I think, 26 points, 12 rebounds, 9 of 15 shooting in a win over the Houston Rockets. And not just those numbers, I think the more impressive numbers, 5 blocks in that game, and also the fact that he played 39 minutes in what was just his second game back from that couple of game absence when he hobbled off the floor on Christmas Day against the Warriors with that groin injury. So playing 39 minutes, 5 block shots, proving that rim protector and two-way presence that, I don't know, I've said this all along before it even became a really big discussion after the game yesterday. I've said this all along. You have to be intrigued by the idea of Anthony Davis on this team, even if you're against it. Okay, even if you're against it, I think you have to be intrigued by what Anthony Davis would look like on this team with Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler. So let's get into it, because essentially we had Davis putting up those big numbers on yesterday against the Rockets, and then a couple hours later or whatever, Draymond gets ejected late in the second quarter. I thought he played okay to that point, but he was also a minus 15 in the game, and the Warriors were down 12 when he left. And as I said, they outscored the Jazz by 21 from that point on. They went on a quick run to kind of close the gap a little bit before halftime, and then really, I would say, controlled the second half. It was still reasonably close throughout the third quarter and stuff like that, but Steph Curry obviously did his thing. 20 points or 21 points or whatever it was in the third quarter was massive. Few, audacious shot making and dazzling stuff that we've come to know from Steph. So that was extraordinary to watch. And it was really interesting to hear what he had to say in his post-game press conference after that in regard to how differently the Warriors played without Draymond, because as much as we might want to hide from it, and there are going to be Draymond fans out there who, will still argue that this team is better when Draymond Green is on the floor. But unfortunately, the facts are that we have a pretty common theme here over the past month, dating back to the start of December, that the Warriors are a better team when Draymond's off the floor, right? And so what's the reason for that? Well, to me, it's not that Draymond's suddenly become a bad player, right? Draymond, I think, is still a valuable player in the NBA, right? Is he worth the number he's making contract-wise? Maybe not, but I also don't think it's an outrageous contract necessarily. But he's being asked on this team to do too much. His role on this team is almost too significant and outweighs his skill set on both ends of the floor. And not just his skill set, but also physically what he can do at this point of his career. He's 35 years old at the end of the day. So it's not that he's suddenly a bad basketball player. It's the role he's being asked to play, which is to have the ball in his hands way too much offensively, to be the facilitator, to be controlling things way too much offensively, which I think he's done to hide his limitations, because if he doesn't have the ball in his hands and he's not playmaking for you, what's he doing? Is he just standing in a corner where teams are just going to leave him wide open? Yes, to some degree, obviously. And so he has the ball at the top of the key and runs around at the top of the key and is looking for Steph all the time and stuff like that. And that stuff, it's always been the case, but it feels a little bit more heavy, I don't know, at this point. And I think part of that as well is the turnover issues. He's really trying to force passes at times. Some guys cut into the rim. It's all right, let me see if I can thread a needle through here and make, a really difficult pass. Oops, no, they got it, it's got deflected. Now we're going back the other way. And we know Golden State's, kryptonite is the turnovers. When the Warriors take control of the ball and don't turn the ball over, then they are a really good team. So offensively, you just don't need the ball in the hands of Draymond Green as much as you do when you've got Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler. And I think it's not necessarily a Steph thing. It's more of a Jimmy thing. Steve said it a few times. It's well, I just need to do a better job of getting the ball in Jimmy Butler's hands. And it's like, well, in order to do that, you're going to have to take it out of Draymond. You're going to have to say to Draymond, sorry, mate, like, I want to get the ball in Jimmy's hands more. That's going to, what it's going to be. And then defensively, I put this on Steve more so than Draymond. Like, Steve's just still asking Draymond to play heavy minutes as a small ball 5 when I really don't think he needs to. Like, I think Quinton Post is the starting center. He hasn't been great recently, but I thought he played well yesterday. He had 15 points, 6 of 9 shooting, 3 of 6 from 3. Some of his defensive stuff, more so when Draymond went down in the second half, I thought was really good. Trace, I thought was pretty good again yesterday. I think he's been pretty good. And Al Horford, in the games he's played since his return on Christmas Day against the Mavericks, has been really good. So to me, you should be able to get 48 minutes of center play, at least during the regular season, out of those 3 guys right now. But instead, you're still going to heavy minutes with Draymond as a small ball 5. So the role that he's playing right now just isn't necessarily suited to his skill set, right? And his age, size, and what he should be dealing with at this point of his career. And Steph said yesterday in the post-game press conference when asked, what was different about the second half? And he's like, I just, without Draymond, just ran a heap of pick and roll. And it's like, well, maybe that's kind of, you got to look at that and say, hang on a second, maybe we should just be running a heap of pick and roll. And that kind of, again, you can't help but be intrigued by the idea of Anthony Davis and you just saying, all right, we're going to go to a more traditional offense. Okay, because Steph's shown that he can play it. Jimmy, we know, is smart enough. He can play it. We're going to go to a more traditional pick and roll heavy offense where it's like Steph pick and roll with AD, Jimmy pick and roll with AD, whatever it may be, and then just pick your shooters, right? Moses Moody, Quinton Post. Like, I think if Anthony Davis was on this team, Davis started at power forward for the Mavericks yesterday. I would still expect Anthony Davis to start at the 4 for the Warriors. Now, would he play a lot of minutes at the 5? Yes, obviously. But I think he could start at the 4, Quinton Post at the 5, just put Quinton Post in a corner or whatever. That gives you another pick and pop threat with Quinton Post. Obviously, you could throw D'Anthony Melton out there, whose 3-ball starting to come around a little bit more. Will Richard. There's guys on this team that you can kind of plug in as your wings, I suppose, or your 3-and-D catch and shoot guys to go with Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Anthony Davis. So this is where the discussion gets really, really interesting because we have heard over the past, and again, this is what I wanted to get into because I haven't spoken since these reports come out, but we've now had multiple reports. I think Sam Amick's one, was it Tuesday or Wednesday, was probably the most prominent one in terms of multiple things coming out of him in reporting that. First of all, I think one of the biggest things is the Mavericks have interest in Kuminga, which is all of a sudden whoa, okay, so that makes a Davis trade more realistic because they'd be willing to take on Kuminga. And it's also well, even if Davis, even if the Warriors, their stance is we want to keep Draymond Green and Jimmy Butler, then maybe there's other things that could happen where, another player or two comes from the Mavericks to the Warriors, or there's a 3-team trade that sends Kuminga to the Mavs. I think obviously the more shooters that Kuminga has, the better for the Warriors in terms of looking at all these different deals that they could make between now, or not now, but January 15 and the February 5 trade deadline. So that was obviously a notable element. And then the other really big notable element was that the Mavericks were the ones that actually reached out to the Warriors in regards to discussing an Anthony Davis trade, which if you're the team that reaches out, that automatically kind of puts you on the back foot. And that's why you could be getting Anthony Davis at a reasonably cheap price because you know that the Mavericks want to move him, have interest in a deal. Obviously, the Atlanta Hawks, I think, are probably the more prominent team right now in terms of an AD trade. But it's really the Hawks and the Warriors, and there's not really much of a market outside of that because of obviously the combination of the injury history and the contracts. But I just want to bring a few points to the table when it comes to Anthony Davis and the injury history and just his fit on the Warriors and why I think making a Jonathan Kuminga, Buddy Hield, and Draymond Green with a pick, that kind of deal for AD. Now, obviously, I'm well aware it would have to involve a third team because of the salary matching components of it. But I am starting, like a lot of people were after yesterday's game, I am starting to become a fan of that idea, essentially. Now, I'm not at the front. I'm not at the front of the queue, banging doors down, screaming at Mike Dunleavy Jr. for him to do this. I'm more out the back thinking about it, and the more I think about it, the more I think it makes some sense. And here's why. So, first of all, you've obviously got the Draymond aspect to it, but I want to focus on AD for a second. First of all, the injury issues with Anthony Davis, I think, are a little bit overblown. Now, obviously, when you play against him on Christmas Day and he just hobbles off the floor very innocuously with a groin injury, that's not great. Okay, that's not great. But if you actually look at the numbers here, and I put it out on Twitter, I put it in an article as well. Anthony Davis has played more games, 183 that is, over the last 3 full seasons than Jimmy Butler had in his 3 full seasons before the Warriors traded for him in February last year. Okay, Jimmy played 181. So essentially the same, right? And before people say, oh, well, Jimmy got suspended by the Heat and that's why he missed time. No, I'm saying the last 3 full seasons for Anthony Davis before this one and the 3 full seasons for Jimmy Butler before last season when the Warriors traded for him. And of course, Jimmy Butler got suspended by the Heat early last season. So this excludes Jimmy Butler's suspension, right? So essentially, I looked at it and I thought, well, really, there's no more risk in trading for Anthony Davis from just a pure health and availability standpoint. There's no more risk trading for Anthony Davis right now than there was with Jimmy Butler last season. It's essentially the same. It's 183 versus 181. Played the same amount of games in not the same period, but the same period in terms of the 3 full seasons before the Warriors would trade for them. Okay. Or did trade in the case of Jimmy. So I think the injury issues are a little bit overblown, but I'll accept there are still huge injury risks when it comes with Anthony Davis and a guy that's making that much money and might want a max extension, which I think is probably the point which I'm not necessarily going to discuss too much, but and I don't think people are discussing too much on social media, but is a huge thing is this guy going to want a max extension? And that's something that if the Warriors were at all interested, or any team at all interested, would be going to Rich Paul or whatever. Rich Paul's still his agent, yeah? And saying, okay, are you definitely going to want a max? Or can we want to bring you in. We think with you we can be a title contender, but, we need to work something out here. Now, obviously, last season they trade for Jimmy Butler and they give him the 2-year deal. I think with Anthony Davis, could it be like, okay, a similar thing? We'll give you the max, but it's only going to be for 2 years. Okay, now he's contracted, I think, till the end of next season, and then he's got a player option. So essentially, he's definitely not getting a full 4 or 5 year max beyond that. Okay, because that will take him, 33 right now? Let's say he picks up that player option. That means he's going to be 35, 36 or whatever. He's not going to get I don't think he's going to get a 4 or 5 year extension off that. No way. Maybe 1 or 2 though, potentially. Maybe you opt out of that player option, as Jimmy did. Jimmy had a player option for this season, opted out of it to re-sign that 2 years. So the Warriors just essentially added a year onto Jimmy. I could see them doing a similar thing potentially with Anthony Davis. But there are injury risks when you weigh up, again, that history and the contract that he's on. However, that's also why you'd be getting Anthony Davis at a heavy discount. We've got to remember this was the guy. Now, it was the worst trade in NBA history, right? And the guy got fired for it, Nico Harrison. But we've got to remember that this guy was the key piece coming back in a Luka Doncic trade less than 12 months ago, right? Less than 12 months ago. And everyone saw it as a horrible trade, and it's turned out to be that way. But a lot of people at the time were like, well, Anthony Davis is a top 15 player in basketball, right? So if you've got a guy who's arguably a top 15, top 20 player in the game, who, again, showed you last night 26 points, 12 rebounds, 9 of 15, 5 blocks, 39 minutes in a win against a good team in the Rockets. If you're getting that guy and it's only costing you, let's say, 1 first-round pick, and okay, maybe it's 2 or maybe you got to give up a second-round pick because, you got to give something to Brooklyn or the third team to take on, I know, Buddy Hield's contract or whatever to make the contracts work. But if it's not costing you, let's say, any more than 2 first-round picks, and the first-round picks are like the closest ones, like 2026 and 20, maybe it's like 2026 and a 2027 pick swap or something like that, right? If that's what it's going to cost, then you are getting a very, very talented player at an extremely cheap price. Okay, if it's Jonathan Kuminga, Draymond Green, Buddy Hield, and a pick and a pick swap and a second or something, I don't know, something like that. And I'm not even sure the Mavericks would go for that. But it feels like Anthony Davis's market is really not thriving at all. And therefore, that's kind of what the cost could be. And again, that's similar to what the Warriors got Jimmy for last season. And that's obviously worked out really well for the Warriors, it must be said. Like, maybe they don't look great right now. They're 2 games above 500. They're 8th in the Western Conference. But Jimmy Butler has, let's be honest, been a big positive for this team. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And the Warriors took advantage of a situation where they got a top 20 to 25 player in the door for a cheap price because of the way that he exited Miami and made things so difficult for them and got to a point where they couldn't possibly keep him and had to trade him. So again, you can complain about the injury history. You can use the injury history as a reason why you wouldn't trade for him, but it's also why you'd be getting him at a very discounted rate. And then if you look at the team in games where AD was to miss, let's say he played 55 games and he missed 27 games. Okay, paying a guy $50+ million to play 55 games isn't ideal. Okay, I completely understand that. However, you would still have Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler to run the offense, to generate the offense. And I think as long as you had obviously come playoff time, you'd want all those 3 guys healthy. But as long as you had 2 of the 3 healthy, I think during the regular season, then you would have the makings, I think, of a very reasonable team, even with only 2 of them playing, right? Because look at that team that played in the second half yesterday against the Jazz, okay, looked like a pretty reasonable team, okay, and that's the team without Anthony Davis and without Draymond Green. That's the team with those either of those guys on the sidelines, okay. So I think you can, and that's kind of why teams in the past have said, well, we want to have 3-star players. It's because, well, if one of them's out, then we can still survive. We can still be a reasonable team. We can still be a competent offense and survive. And rather than obviously have, the Warriors in the, recently, have had Steph and Jimmy or just Steph last season. And, if Steph's out, okay, cool, done. Like, you're just not going to win games, right? So that's why teams, have previously liked to go to 3 stars, to give them a little bit of insurance, to give them a little bit of leeway to deal with an injury to a star player that doesn't completely, totally wreck their season necessarily. So I think you would still have a reasonable team even when AD's off the floor. And then the other aspect of this is right now, Buddy Hield and Jonathan Kuminga are out of the rotation. They're not playing, right? Or Buddy's played a little bit recently, but when the Warriors are fully healthy, he's not in Steve Kerr's rotation. Therefore, essentially right now, you are asking, would you prefer Draymond Green or Anthony Davis? That's what you're asking. And I think if that's what it comes down to, and the offset cost of that is, again, the 2026 first round pick and a swap or 2, whatever. If that's what the offset cost is, and it really comes down to Draymond Green or Anthony Davis, I just have a hard time how Mike Dunleavy Jr. in the front office and Joe Lacob, but even Steph Curry, because Steph has a big say in this. I just have a hard time wondering how they would be like, nah, we'll keep Draymond. Like, that's almost what it comes. It's like Jonathan Kuminga is a 0 to you. Buddy Hield is a 0 to you. It really comes down to, would you prefer Draymond Green or Anthony Davis? Like, I don't know. That to me, that's a pretty obvious. Like Anthony, you'd prefer, even with the injury risks, you'd prefer Anthony Davis. Now, the other way you could go to this, and what I think the front office would probably say, because Amick and others have reported that the Warriors have no interest right now in trading Jimmy, and I'm definitely not trading Jimmy Butler for Anthony Davis, but no interest in trading Draymond right now. They would probably argue that no, we can keep Draymond and we can use the contracts of Jonathan Kuminga, Buddy Hield, perhaps a Moses Moody as well, to go and get a $30 to $40 million player rather than Anthony Davis making $50+ million. And if that's the path they go down and they get the right player, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with them keeping Draymond, right? But it comes down to you've got to pull off something reasonably significant to be able to alter the fortunes of your team enough. And whether that includes Draymond or not, I don't mind, right? Again, I'm open to trading Draymond Green for Anthony Davis, again, because I just think Anthony Davis is better than Draymond, right? And I think everyone would have to agree with that, again, despite the injury history. The other aspect to this as well is that people would say, well, today's CBA, having three guys making $50+ million doesn't work. Look at the Phoenix Suns. Look how much better the Phoenix Suns are right now compared to what they were last season with, and even the season before with Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal, right? Well, for starters, this trio would be better than that trio, right? Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Anthony Davis is a better trio than Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal. I think we can all agree to that. The second thing is, if there's one thing that Mike Dunleavy Jr. has proven good at as general manager since he took over from Bob Myers, it's that he's a pretty good identifier of talent and showing the ability to get pretty reasonable rotation pieces out of nowhere and towards the back end of the roster. Like Will Richard, just out of nowhere, 56 overall pick, bang, like could arguably be a starter for this team, has been already earlier this season. Quentin Post is a starter for this team, bang, 52nd overall pick. Trace Jackson Davis, 57th overall pick, suddenly re-emerged as like an okay rotation piece for you. So I think his ability to fill out the back end of the roster has, like, that's been a real positive. It's also been a huge issue. It's also been a problem because Steve has too many players that are theoretically capable of playing, and so he's left with all these rotation questions. Okay, which again is why a consolidation trade needs to happen. So when you've got such a top end roster in terms of salary, where you've got three guys making $50+ million, like, you need to hit on your minimums, on your late second round picks, on rounding out the rest of the roster with rotation guys. And I think Mike Dunleavy, like, I'm pretty confident that Mike Dunleavy Jr. can do that based on what he's done in the first couple of years as general manager. Again, with those guys getting, picked in the 50s and stuff like that. And so trading for Anthony Davis right now and having three guys over $50+ million, is it really depleting your depth? Is it? Not really. I mean, the Warriors went to what, a 12-man rotation yesterday? I think it was 11, wasn't it? They went to an 11-man rotation against the Jazz yesterday. And basically you're just saying, well, that's the same 11 guys, except we're swapping out Draymond for AD. That's what it is. So it's not like you're depleting your depth a whole lot either. So I think that's why the Warriors probably have the ability, unlike other teams, to be able to take a risk on Anthony Davis, because you have the insurance of Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler, who, if AD's out, those guys can still generate offense. You have the strengths of Mike Dunleavy Jr. as a GM, being able to identify talent late in the draft and on minimum contracts and whatever else. And then thirdly, you also have the insurance of, well, AD is not our lone big man. We also still have Al Horford. We still have Quentin Post. We still have Trace Jackson Davis, which allows you to, one, again, cope when AD is off the floor. And secondly, it allows you to be very flexible with your lineups, where you could play a lot of double big lineups with AD and Horford, or AD and Quinton Post, or I'm not sure AD Trace would play a whole lot, but these kind of lineups, right? Which would be a welcome change, I think, to many Warrior fans who have lamented the lack of size in Steve Kerr's lineups for years and years, and getting a guy like Anthony Davis, a 6'10 guy, big frame, who could essentially play probably the majority of his minutes as a power forward, or at least split, let's say 50-50. That would be quite a welcome change, I think, to a lot of Warrior fans. So, I don't know. This, to me, the more I think about it, and as I lay it out to you guys, I hope that maybe I'm bringing something to you in terms of an understanding of why this might make some sense. But again, if the Warriors want to go down a different path, I think there's 3 trades right now that would make sense to me. And these are probably the only 3 trades that I can think of that could realistically take the Warriors into being a pretty dangerous threat in the Western Conference. It's the AD one that I just laid out. It's Draymond, JK, Buddy, and a pick or whatever for AD, and obviously there has to be a third team involved. There's the Michael Porter Jr. aspect of this, which I think is probably the most realistic right now, in terms of that's a guy the Warriors can probably go and get, and they're probably going to be pretty content on doing so, because it means they don't have to give up Draymond. They could do JK, Buddy Hield, and Moses Moody for Michael Porter Jr., and then essentially from yesterday's team, you're replacing Moses Moody with Michael Porter Jr., which again makes a lot of sense. So that's another guy that I could see trading for. And then you've got the Trey Murphy aspect of this as well, which hasn't got too much reports or anything, speculation around that in recent weeks necessarily. But that's still kind of lurking there as a guy that the Warriors we know like, and the Warriors would like to get their hands on probably. Again, that's going to cost the most from a draft capital standpoint. And then the Michael Porter Jr. is going to cost you maybe a couple of first-round picks. And then AD is probably the least from a draft capital standpoint, but the most from a franchise perspective in terms of having to give up Draymond, okay, because he's a franchise legend. I think if Clay was still on this team, then I would be probably more in the camp of I'd be okay with like riding it out with these guys, I suppose. But the fact that Clay's already left, and Clay was or is my favorite player, whatever, it kind of, the sentimental aspect to this has gone away a little bit. Now, it's certainly still a part of it. There's no doubt about that. And it would still be difficult for the Warriors to trade Draymond from a sentimental aspect. But I think really what it comes down to at the end of the day is we're trying to win another championship. What's our best way to do that? Having a Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Anthony Davis combination. If that team is healthy in the playoffs, that's a dangerous team. That's a team that other rivals aren't going to want to go up against, I don't think, if that team is somewhere near full health. And it also comes down to, would you prefer Draymond Green or Anthony Davis on your team? And as much as we might want to see, Draymond as a franchise legend and respect everything that he's done for this team over the last dozen years, the facts of the matter are that you just prefer Anthony Davis over Draymond Green. That's what it is. So let me know, guys. I'm amazed that I've been able to go for 33 minutes here without absolutely coughing my lungs up or needing to blow my nose or anything. Sorry for the detail. But I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. Follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. Important as well, the Patreon is now going to be free for the first 2 weeks of January. So if you want to check out more of my content, I've got a daily Warriors newsletter where you can keep up with the latest news, information, rumors, my opinions, stuff like that. And then also daily podcasts throughout the week as well. You can go check that out for free for anyone over the next couple of weeks. Obviously, if you could sign up and become a member, that would be fantastic. I'm going to finish it up there. The Warriors play again tomorrow against the LA Clippers. That's probably going to be a little bit more of a challenge than what they've faced with some of these teams. Necessarily, the Clippers are actually in some reasonable form after obviously a horrible start to the season, but fingers crossed, obviously, the Warriors can get a dub, and we'll see if I can do a live stream after that. I actually feel pretty good after this. I'm surprised I've been able to go for this long. So hopefully, potentially a live stream tomorrow and maybe an episode with Stevie later in the week as well. But thanks again, guys.